So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at how you can update your jailbreak, your YouTube jailbreak, to the latest version. We'll also take a look at a couple of things that you can do to improve stability when running the jailbreak. So the version that we installed in the original video, the playlist is linked in the video description, by the way, that has all of the videos I've made in the series so far. So in the first video, we installed a backup file to get the YouTube application installed with the YouTube jailbreak. So we can use the YouTube app to jailbreak the console. However, that was version 0.8 of the autoloader that was included in that backup. Rather than restoring a new backup that contains the latest version, which will have things like stability improvements and other improvements, we don't want to do that because that will reset the console, but instead, we can get the application updated without having to restore another backup. So if we go to launch the application here, you can see that it does show up and says it's version 0.8, as you can see there. Also says pipes master equals 34. That 34 number gives you an idea of how stable the exploit will be after it's loaded. So after the 50-minute wait time when it loads the jailbreak, the lower that master number is, the more chance it will be more stable when you run the jailbreak. So one of the things I've already noticed that improves this is that you can improve the stability of loading the exploit by just going into the settings and going to Network, Settings, and uncheck the box to connect to the internet. You can reconnect once you have the jailbreak loaded, but by just disabling the internet connection like that, before you run the jailbreak, when you next go to run the jailbreak, you'll notice that master number is now down at 31 from 34, which means it's much more likely to be stable when the jailbreak is loaded and less likely to crash your console after the jailbreak completes. So that's one thing you can do to improve stability. The other thing you can do, of course, is update to the latest version. Now, the way that you can update, if we switch over to the computer, the version that was included in the backup is this version of the autoloader. Version 0.8 is the one that is in the backup file that we installed originally, and you can see we now have a new stable release of version 0.9. So to update to this version, there's two ways you can update. I'll show you how to use the main updater for the autoloader, but I'll also show you how to manually install the update in case you're using a completely different version of the YouTube jailbreak rather than this autoloader version, so that you can switch to this autoloader. So if you're going from a previous version of this autoloader, you just need to download the y2jb update.zip file here, download that over to your computer as you can see here, and then you want to copy that over to a USB drive. Now you want to make sure the USB drive is formatted in exFAT or FAT32 format. So if you right-click on the drive and go to Properties, make sure that the file system is either FAT32 or exFAT. If it's not, you can right-click on the drive and format it, and then change the file system to FAT32 or exFAT, and then click Start to reformat the drive. Obviously, back up any data on the drive before reformatting it. So at that point, you can go ahead and copy the zip file into the root of the USB drive. Do not put it inside any existing folders. Just put it in the root of the drive and make sure it still has the original file name of y2jb_update.zip. That is what you want there. Make sure View Show File Name Extensions is ticked as well in your Windows Explorer so you can see the full file name with the file extension. So I have discovered an issue with the updater, especially for firmwares above 10.1 that have to use the 50-minute jailbreak, which is that when it does the update and runs the jailbreak, it does not actually automatically load the payload manager, so you can then load your payloads and get the jailbreak fully set up. So you end up having to restart the console and then load the jailbreak again a second time, which would mean having to wait 50 minutes twice to get the jailbreak loaded after updating, which would take about an hour and 40 minutes to actually load everything to completion if you're using that longer jailbreak. To avoid that, what we can do instead is if we head over to the autoloader releases page and just download an older version, like version 0.8 here, if we download the update file for version 0.8 and open the zip file, you can see that this older version has this PS5 autoloader folder here. You can just extract that into the root of the USB drive. So inside this autoloader folder, it has the payload manager in here. So after the update is complete, when it updates to version 0.9, it will check the USB drive for this PS5 autoloader folder, and it will read this autoload.txt file. And this text file tells it to load the payload manager, so it will automatically load the payload manager. Now, this is something else you can do for stability as well, is that if you're somebody who's constantly running into crashes when loading the YouTube jailbreaks, where the jailbreak seems to load normally and then the console crashes, you can add a delay to the payloads so that the payloads have to wait a certain number of seconds before loading, which can improve stability. So basically you add a exclamation mark and then the number of, I think it's milliseconds, so 1000 would be 1 second delay. Generally, you want to try a delay of 5 to 10 seconds to see if that improves things if you're running into crashes when loading the YouTube jailbreak. So you can add like a 10-second delay before loading the payload manager, and then you can save that. And then it will wait 10 seconds before loading it after running the jailbreak. So that's something you can do. But by plugging that USB drive now into the PS5, once the update is complete, it will scan this autoloader folder and load the payload automatically for us. And then once we are updated, we can unplug the USB drive and it should just load as normal. It will just load the payload manager as normal. Now you can also use this autoloader just to load your normal payloads instead of using the payload manager. The payload manager seems to have some issues on older firmwares, so you could just add your payloads like KStuff, NanoDNS, and ShadowMount into the PS5 autoloader folder and also add them into the text file, and it will autoload them without the need for the payload manager. So now we can unplug the USB drive and plug it into the PS5. So now all we need to do is load the YouTube application with the USB drive plugged in. And what it will do is it will run the jailbreak as normal, so nothing different will appear. Initially, it's still version 0.8, as you can see there, and now we have to wait for the jailbreak to run to completion, because in order to install the update file, the console needs to be jailbroken to have root access to the file system to be able to write the update to the file system, so we have to wait for the jailbreak to complete. So I'll be back with you guys once the console is jailbroken. Okay, so the update happens pretty quickly here, so we're at the end of running the jailbreak. And here we go, so it's running the actual exploit itself, but as soon as it's done loading the exploit, it will come up saying extracting. So there is right there, so updating Y2JB, starting extraction, and then a few seconds later, the update is done. Just like that, it is now done. But anyway, as you can see, if I go to load the YouTube jailbreak again, it should come up saying it's now on version 0.9. As you can see right there, it is on version 0.9. So now that we have the jailbreak loaded, we can now go back into the network settings and reconnect to the internet. And now I have the payload manager running. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the payload manager. So if you're using a completely different version of the YouTube jailbreak to the autoloader, you will not be able to use that zip file in that case to update to the latest version. So instead, you'll have to install it manually. So to install it manually, the best way to update is to use FTP. It's the most reliable method. So if we go into the Manage Payload section and scroll down to the Cloud repository, so nothing is showing up in here because I'm not running NanoDNS, so I need to run NanoDNS on the console. If you don't have this installed, it's covered in the original video. The first video in the series shows you how to install the jailbreak and get payloads installed like NanoDNS to get an internet connection while blocking Sony servers. So we run NanoDNS. The playlist, by the way, is linked in the video description for the previous videos. And then we go into Manage Payloads, and if we scroll down, we now have the Cloud repository loaded, and we can find FTP, and we can install the FTP server payload, and then we can go to the dashboard, and we can load FTP in here. And also, if you have the ELF Arsenal payload installed, if you're using that, you can run ELF Arsenal, and it has an FTP server built in as well, so you don't need the FTP server payload standalone if you're using ELF Arsenal, as it has its own version. So when we loaded FTP there, it came up with our IP address. You can also find it by going into System Software and Console Information, so 192.168.137.176. And on the computer, instead of downloading the update.zip file, we download the download0.dat file instead for a manual installation, and then we can run an FTP client like FileZilla on our console. I'll leave a link to this in the video description. Type in the IP address, which is 192.168.137.176 in my case for my PS5, and then put in the port number as 2121 and quick connect to connect over to the PS5's file system over FTP. So from here, in the right-hand box here, we have our console, and in here, we can go down to the user folder, and then inside the user folder, we have a download folder. We go in there, and then we have a PPSA 01650, so we go into that folder, and we can see we have a download0.dat file already in here. We need to take the one that we downloaded and copy it into this location and say yes to override the original file, and you can see it transferring over there at the bottom, and that is now done. So if you're updating from a different version of the YouTube jailbreak, it should now be updated to the latest version of the autoloader by just manually installing the download 0 file. However, you can also use Elf Arsenal instead. If you have that installed from the first video, then you can load up that payload, the Elf Arsenal payload, then simply copy the download 0.dat file to the root of the USB drive for the latest version and plug that USB drive into the PS5. Then once the payload is running, you can open up a web browser on your computer or phone that's connected to the same network as the PS5, enter the PS5's IP address in the URL bar with :6969, and that will take you over to the web panel for Elf Arsenal, and you can go over to the file manager and then simply use that file manager to do the same thing. Select your download 0.dat file, and you can copy it over to that same location on the internal storage, user download ppsa 01650, and get the file updated that way using Elf Arsenal's file manager instead of FTP. So that's how you get the YouTube jailbreak updated. You can use the autoloader if you're going from a previous version. That is the easiest option. But then also if you need to install manually from a different version of the YouTube jailbreak, you can simply copy the download 0.dat file to the user download ppsa 01650 folder using either FTP or the file manager within Elf Arsenal will also work. And don't forget that you can also improve stability by disabling the internet connection in your network settings before running the YouTube application, which will then give it a better chance of being more stable after loading the jailbreak. So keep an eye on the playlist that's in the video description because I'll be adding more videos to this series. But that's going to do it for this one, so hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and as always, I will hopefully see you